All right, everyone. Welcome to the JediRP.net podcast. I'm your host, Delta73, and these are my co hosts. Charles, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hey, my name's Charles. I discovered Star Wars through a special edition set of VHSs in my parents' basement when I was 7, and I've kind of been hooked ever since. That should probably date me a bit. I've been deep into a lot of the in-universe technical aspects of the series for over 18 years. Currently, I'm working on a master's degree in English. I've been writing Star Wars fan fiction for roughly the same amount of time. So my big focus areas are storytelling and some of the finer technical points of the science and technology we see in the science fiction saga that is Star Wars.
Wonderful. That's very interesting. Mavager, what about yourself?
I'm Mavenger or Zach. I've been watching Star Wars since as long as I can remember. My experience has mostly been watching Episode 3 on repeat throughout on DVR for hours and hours and hours.
Oh, wonderful. And Mythos, what was your experience with Star Wars? What brought you here?
Well, let's see. I started out much like Harry there. Uh, my aunt, she had the three VHS collection of Star Wars, the original trilogy. Matter of fact, her and her husband, that was their first date, was to go watch Episode 4 while I was in the theaters. So I got turned onto it through there, and then probably about the time the original Knights of the Old Republic came out, is when I got back into it. And, that's actually what led me to the site, and I've been there pretty much ever since.
Wonderful. And Zendrin, what about yourself?
Oh, I'm Brad. I got brought into Star Wars when I was maybe 7 or 8. I got sat down and told, "You're watching the entire trilogy back to back," and so I spent at least an entire weekend sitting in front of the TV. Um, I got brought into the RP by Zach, who for months was on and off. Should we say not bribing? How should we say dragging me into it till I finally said, "All right, sure, why not?" And no, I've had a great experience since then.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all for joining me today. Uh, Today, our discussion topic is on season 1, episode 1 of Star Wars The Bad Batch, called Aftermath. This is a new, of course, for those that don't know, this is a new iteration of the Clone Wars, kind of focusing on this deviant side of the clones. So, first off, let's start off with opening thoughts. Charles, what about you? What were your first impressions of this episode?
So it's a pilot, so there are a lot of questions that it brings up, but it's supposed to because it has a lot of foreshadowing in it. Um, I mean, we got to take this with a grain of salt because it is a kids show, so it might not appeal to some of the older generations as much. But I think it accomplished what it set out to do, and it does seem like it sets up a pretty exciting arc. So, I mean, I'm here for it.
Completely agree. And Zach, what were your thoughts?
Well, my first thought was, holy crap, that's a long first episode. But after watching it, I understand why they felt the need to make it over an hour long, because without it, we'd have 4 episodes without ever getting off of Camino, and none of it felt like a good spot to disjoint different episodes. It all felt like it had to be in one episode.
I agree. It definitely seemed like it needed this amount of space to really set itself up. Zendrin, what about yourself?
Are we going to skip Chad?
Well, we're
Fair enough. No, go ahead. The very introduction of the show was amazing. Uh, Seeing the battleground as vivid as it was awesome. Personally, not too big a fan of the character introductions, but you got to be over top and showy when you're introducing this, badass squad. Apologies. Overall, though, I agree with Zach. There was a lot of stuff that they needed to squish in, and I think they did a really good job of it.
I agree with you. All right, Mythos. And what about yourself? What were your first impressions of this episode?
Well, to be quite honest, and I know this is probably gonna inflame Tim a little bit, but as y'all know, I'm a fan of the Star Wars Rebels, and to see them not only show Order 66 in another light, uh, when dealing with the clones. I mean, the original, um, in the prequel trilogy, Order 66, you just saw the main characters. You didn't get to see backstage characters, and and then of course the introduction of Caleb Dune. And to be honest, was just seeing all that culmination together, and then exploring more about what the Bad Batch is after their introduction in the last season of the Clone Wars. Um, it felt right to me.
Okay, well that totally makes sense. I for one did not know the annoying apprentice character in this first episode named Caleb was a continuation character. I thought it was just a one-off character, so that's really good to know. Uh, let's start off just with continuing along the lines of first impressions. What do you guys think about the animation style? Me myself, I thought, and this is the problem I always had with the Clone Wars, is that it really just looks like marionettes just kind of wandering around the the stage. Does that make sense, Zach? What are your thoughts here?
I I'm a longtime fan of the Clone Wars actual series, right? The original series. And one of the things about that, the draw of it, is they are able to do a lot flashier lightsaber duels, which I'm always a fan of, using that art style, which was very prevalent in the actual show. That said, focusing so much time on the show on the clones this time around, I Brad pointed something out to me that I have not been able to unsee,
Mhm.
and that is that the armor of the clones moves with the body like it's clothing rather than armor,
Ah,
and it's awful.
so do you think that's more of a limitation of the animation system they're using, or is it just an oversight?
I don't think it's an oversight. I don't think it's a limitation of the animation either. I think it's a limitation of the amount of detail they're trying to put into it, right? Because it's much easier to animation wise graft a design over a flexible body via animation than to actually animate the interaction of hard pieces of armor with a body. It takes a lot less time, and it's a relatively minor thing that I never noticed through the 7 or 8 seasons of Clone Wars, right? And I only noticed it this time because Appa pointed it out.
That totally makes sense. Charles, what are your thoughts on the animation style?
Um, I mean, granted, I've been spoiled with mocap. I've been spoiled with, different kind of recent computer animation styles. Um, I respect that the original design was also designed more as a kid show. So you got to kind of take it with a grain of salt. But I do agree with what you guys were saying with how it kind of looks like marionettes kind of running across the thing. I don't think the skeletons of the animation figures really move in a completely realistic way. There's something on in there that's just uncanny valley enough to make me take a second look when I'm studying the faces of some of these characters. But otherwise, I mean, as a kids show, it's decent animation for a kids show. It definitely shows uh, Disney's wallet showing through for the kind of studios that can churn out this kind of content.
I see. I see. I also got the impression, of course, as I originally stated, marionettes, but I also was remembered of an old animation series called Code Lyoko, with the way that the characters would kind of run in this flat, never moving up and down way. It seems inhuman. Mythos, what are your opinions on the animation style?
Well, first off, thanks guys for running this whole thing for me. Just kidding. But to be quite honest, as long as it stays away from the Samurai Jack animation or the Ruby animation, be honest with you, I'm quite happy with it.
Okay, could you describe more what you mean by Samurai Jack or Ruby style animation?
Well, okay, with the Samurai Jack, I mean, I don't know if any of y'all have seen it, but I'm sure you have. Uh, the original Clone Wars 2D animation style,
Oh,
it completely just wanted to gouge my eyes out. Um,
I I see what you mean. I feel the same way when I watch Star Wars Rebels, so I understand where you're coming from.
but I mean, at the same time, like I I don't know if y'all have seen the show Ruby, but it as long as it's not blocky 3D and the characters have a sense of motion and everything, and not just too over the top. Be honest with you, I mean, I'm happy with it.
That's wonderful. Brad, do you have any additions to this topic?
No, I don't know if additions, but more just repeats. Excluding that, I think I'm actually a fan of the art style itself. Kind of a breakaway, kind of its own unique feeling. I fully understand the marionette feeling. Fully understand the marionette feeling, and how should we say rigid it feels and inhuman. Uncanny Valley is the one Charles mentioned.
Wonderful. Zach or Charles, do you guys have anything else? Zach, you go first.
Yeah, I forgot to mention earlier there was a point in the animation right at the very beginning, right? When they're what's the name of the planet? Kala or something?
I
Um
I do not remember.
I think it's Kala. But
I
when
think it is.
they're on Kala, it gives you a shot of the trees and the snow drifting through it as an avalanche comes down. And I remember looking at it because all I could see was the trees and the snow, and I was thinking, man, that's almost photorealistic animation. Like there's so much detail in that. And it's kind of why I forgive the animation, the like just the weird little nitpicks of the animation, like the armor moving with the bodies and the interesting ways that they handle the character movement.
Oh, I see. So I also got that impression. I definitely felt like it was kind of borderline not so good looking marionettes against a beautiful matte painting. So I feel exactly where you're coming from. Charles, do you have anything last to add before we move on to the rest of the discussion topics?
Yeah, really quickly. Mythos actually kind of touched on it, and I forgot to mention that the cinematography in this series is absolutely beautiful. How they shoot the scenes, how they use the camera to characterize as opposed to dialogue. It's really great. It's quality work.
Now, this is something that I think I remember from the Clone Wars, and it's something I've always kind of had a problem with. What do you guys feel? Do you feel like the 1920s style, almost narration, like the introductory guy that's talking about the Republic fleet and all the rest of that? Oh, on this planet. Do you think that's kind of overplayed at this point, or do you think it still fits with this show? Zach, go with you.
Oh, I hate it. Um,
Perfect.
I I think that the problem is it worked really well for the first couple of seasons of the Clone Wars, right? Because that was very much the feeling that it was giving, and I think that they kind of stuck with it. oh, I think that they kind of stuck with it a little longer than they should have because it was there for the first few seasons. Um, but yes, it is very loud and overpowering.
Charles, do you enjoy that announcer voice?
Um, I'm not gonna lie, I didn't watch most of the Clone Wars, and that was one of the things that actually kind of annoyed me a bit. But I have seen openings of episodes of the Clone Wars where it's used to great effect, kind of as a way to set the mood for the intro of the episode. So it's kind of a tool in the director's toolkit that they can use as far as whether I like it or not. I can take it or leave it.
All right. Well, let's get into first off. Let's get into the squad themselves. The Bad Batch, Clone Force 99. Let's go with Charles again. What were your thoughts on the group leader,
Just the
Hunter?
group in
I
general.
believe it. Let's go with let's just enter.
Oh,
Let's have everyone talk about one of the clones, and we'll see how that feels. What did you think about Hunter, Charles, the main guy, the guy with the Rambo, the look?
um, so the one thing that actually kind of threw me off is how you have the New Zealander accent because of Tamura Morrison and his role as Jango Fett, Clone Wars, so on and so forth. But he's from New Zealand. He has a New Zealander accent. Same with the character Omega, actually. And it was actually kind of weird hearing Hunter with an American accent. It was the only thing that kind of put me off. Otherwise, I do like how they characterize him. I do like him as a very strong leader role.
All right, Zach, what are your thoughts about Crosshair, the latent traitor in their midst?
So I'm a big fan of sniper characters in media. I really enjoy snipers. I like watching them portrayed. Some of my favorite characters in shows I've watched have been snipers. I use a sniper rifle in any game I can get my hands on them. Uh, I think I have a lot of issues with the way they've handled the way he's a traitor, and that relates to the overall plot of the episode. So I'll wait on a lot of my thoughts on that. But
Of course.
I think they could have told a much more interesting story with him than they did.
All right. Well, maybe perhaps in time we'll see. Uh, and Brad, why don't you talk to us a bit about Tech, the technology expert of the squad?
I found personally a little over the top, but again, you gotta have that grain of salt for it being a children's show. Really, really flashy on the oh look how smart I am.
Mm-hmm.
But besides that, I actually found the character quite interesting.
That's good. That's good.
Very, very intuitive.
That's wonderful. I personally really liked Echo's character, the differently abled clone trooper. I, of course, did not see the Clone Wars episode, which he was obviously introduced beforehand, but I really enjoyed his obvious burn scarring and his cybernetic unit. To me, it was an interesting introduction to what ulterior things the clones can get into. Uh, Charles, do you have anything to say about their last member, the big bad himself,
Record.
Wrecker?
I absolutely love how they handle Wrecker as a character. He's really the only one in the show who openly displays some kind of mental disability. And it's very interesting to me how the other characters treat him as a result. The five definitely have their own tolerance levels for him. Even Crosshair kind of treats him, a little bit gently, but at the same time with irritation. And how Tech treats him and talks to him is just brilliant. And you can definitely see the difference between that in some of the dialogue in the food fight scene when they're in the cafeteria, um, and how some of the troopers, look at and treat the crew. But Wrecker plays a prominent role in starting that fight. So right on in there, you can kind of see um, the difference in how he's treated internally and externally. And I really think this is a great step forward for any kind of character in media being portrayed with a kind of mental handicap that he has.
Now, do you think they really did the the neurodivergent style proper justice, or do you think there's still room that they can improve here?
Kind of like what Zendrin was saying, with how they do the characterizations a little bit over the top, but it is a children's show, so you take it with a grain of salt. Um, but I also think that that could easily be a realistic portrayal of how somebody acts in the real world. It felt real to me.
Okay. Did you think the addition of the small teddy bear or teddy rancor or whatever it was? Do you think that was a good addition to the character, like this kind of beacon that he holds on to?
I think it's a believable addition to the character.
Perfect.
Is depend on how it's used.
Now, Mythos, can you tell us about a bit about the last member of the Bad Batch, or at least what it appears to be, Omega? What do you think about our little clone altered girl?
Well, I'm still not set on her personally. I like the idea of a female clone, uh, especially given what how do I put it? Especially with what the Bad Batch represents as a whole. I mean, they're not really misfits; they're just enhanced.
So
And go ahead.
so Mythos, if they're are they purely enhanced? Because it seems like some of these enhancements have some very distinct negative consequences, such as Wrecker's neurodivergency or other things like that. How do you
Well,
think that plays in here with Omega?
well, with her, like I said, this is just the first episode. We're not going to get much um, portrayal of her, considering that the main focus right now is on the Bad Batch. I think once we further get into the show and see the character as she is, then we'll get a better read on her. Um, I mean, there's been rumors of her possibly being a Palpatine clone. If that's the case, well, the show's just not for me. I've even heard some people say that it could be a setup for Ray's heritage.
Which would be a Palpatine clone. So
Yeah.
do you what do you think she is? Do you think she's a modification of the gene of Jango Fett that somehow made her a female, or what do you think?
Well, that's what I'm thinking. I think she's been like the rest of the Bad Batch. She's been enhanced, but to a degree of what's the terminology I'm looking for? Like she's the final product of what the Bad Batch was supposed to be.
Interesting. Okay. So
Um, like don't mean to cut you off there, but it's more like uh, she's the final product, and what they wanted out of the clones in uh their enhancements and everything as far as the Caminos go. And I just think that we need to see more of her before any of us can give a better definition of where she fits in.
let's go jump to Zach. Just still on the same question of Omega. Do you think that a young child with blonde hair is somehow an improvement on the Jango Fett clone line?
Oh, I see why you asked me. So I don't think she's a Palpatine clone. Given some of the dialogue in the show, it would be directly misleading if she were. Tech mentions that he basically scanned her genetics and confirmed that she's a clone like them, and that would be a lot less. That would be a very weird way to phrase that if she weren't a clone of Jango at the base. I think, as far as character-wise, I think that she is the character that is here because it's a kid show, right? So in the Clone Wars, that was Ahsoka, and Ahsoka got a lot better later on. But in Rebels, that was Ezra, and Ezra was an abysmal character, in my opinion. So Dave Filoni has a 50-50 track record with this character is here because it's a kid show mentality.
That totally makes sense. Charles, do you anything else to add on Omega before we change topics?
I mean, there's been kind of a theory floating around lately that Dave Filoni is kind of usurping the sequels through his use of the world between worlds in the Clone Wars, and that he might be setting it up to, I don't know, to where Omega is supposed to fill this sort of role that kind of pushes the sequels aside or something. I don't know how true any of that is. I will say that it's uncanny that she looks like Palpatine a bit.
She has the same hairstyle as Palpatine in the clone.
Yeah, she has the same hairstyle, but also like some of the facial features, like the sharpness of her chin, a little bit in the eyes. It's definitely a character's face who was inspired by how they did Palpatine.
Totally makes
But
sense.
Getting back to the world between worlds theory, I honestly think she is force sensitive, and I do think Chad is right with his whole "this is what they were supposed to be." There's a lot of circumstantial evidence surrounding it. Um, in the extended universe before Disney made it not canon, one of the things that um, the Thrawn trilogy by Timothy Zahn laid on out was that clones, force sensitive clones, couldn't be grown, or at least if you did clone somebody, you couldn't speed grow them. So that might be why she's a kid like that. She's not, accelerated growth or something.
So in the Clone series, if I can remember correctly, they suffered some supreme mental deficiencies if they were speed grown with force powers. Is that, am I remembering correctly, Charles?
I think so, man. It's been years since I picked those books up. I'd like to believe that I remember them a lot better than I do, but that specific detail I'd have to go look at.
Totally makes sense. So let's jump to you, Mav.
So it's just a quick answer to that question, since I've just recently read the Timothy Zahn book where that's actually brought up. Yes, if a force clone, if a clone is force speed grown without the presence of Ysalamir, and they have force sensitivity, they do go mad. That was why there were so many Ysalamir all over the planet that Zahn was doing all of his, or not Zahn, but that's why there were Ysalamir all over the place in
That
those
would
books.
totally make sense. Okay. Well, thank you for answering that question. It's been a very long time since I've read those books. Now let's jump to another topic, and this one's going to be a very controversial topic. So I'm going to start with you, Zendrin. What do you think about the behavioral modification biochips that these clones are implanted with, or in instance in this Bad Batch series, only one of them are implanted with?
Actually, I think it was. I think they all had it, but was almost disabled by the modifications. Personally, not too big a fan.
That totally makes sense. I was not a fan either.
Yeah, no, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. But yeah, no, they definitely restricted themselves when they gave them the chips, and you could see in the writing where they had to kind of back themselves out of a corner.
Totally.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, that totally makes sense. Now, I'm going to jump to you, Mavinger, and then I'll jump to you, Mythos. Quick question: do you think why would a genetic modification remove an implanted chip?
So I don't scientifically know if there's a basis for that. It might have something to do with the way that their brains are wired, which would make sense, right? If you pay attention, like all the characters have definite mental quirks that or different wiring in their brains that could affect how an inhibitor chip in their brain would function. And I think it makes sense why Crosshair is the one whose chip is working according to them the best. That said, I think the chips as a whole, I like the Clone Wars TV series, as I mentioned before. I think the chips were easily the worst part of the entire series. I think that I know why they did it, right? Because it's a kids show and you can't show people murking their commanders for like in a kids show of their own free will like that en masse. They don't want kids rooting for people who are about to become mass murderers. I think that in doing so, though, like Appa said, they really shoved themselves in a hole there, right? And that it brings me back to my earlier comment about Crosshair and wanting to wait, right? In the Legends material for clones, there's a lot of them who it's shown that the reason that most of them complied is because they are taught, right? They're flash grown, they're flash trained, and it's basically and they are basically brainwashed into following basically any order they're given, right? But in the Legends material, right, it's shown that certain classifications of clones who are taught to be more free thinking, like Republic Commandos and like ARC Troopers, and these are units that the Bad Batch would definitely fall under, are often free to make their own decisions in that regard regarding Order 66, and they could have done a lot better with Crosshair disagreeing with the rest of the squad without the chip saying that, oh, he's evil because his chip is working still.
Interesting. So Mythos, what do you think about the chips? Do you think they're a good addition to the universe, or do you think probably a different approach would have been better?
A different approach would have been way better. I mean, I've never been a big fan of the chip, but for a kids show, like Manager said, it's an easy write in. I mean, and given the technology of the galaxy far, far away, it's not implausible. Now, as far as the Bad Batch and their resistance to it, yeah, I do think it has a lot to do with the way their brains are wired, the way they were grown to with the enhancement that probably actually inhibit the inhibitor chip.
Got it.
And I think that you know, like with Crosshair, given that he's more of the soldier type, I guess you could say that, and more along the lines of sane, uh, it would give reason why his was so easier to fall into that aspect. And of course, with most shows, you always got to have that good guy that always goes bad, and maybe even have a redemption arc later on in the future. So, but that's just my thoughts on the matter right now.
So Mythos, what are your thoughts on the redemption arc for Crosshair? Is it an effective redemption arc if it's just the chip that was making him do it the whole time?
That's actually what I think is going to define his character. If it's just inhibitor chip, it's going to be crappy. I mean, I honestly think that his personality plays into it a lot because even before uh, Order 66 was given, in just a few minutes that we got to see him, we saw that he was more into his role not just as a sniper, but as a soldier in general. That he took, I wouldn't really say a sense of pride, but a sense of kinship with what he was built to do.
That totally makes sense. I'm going to jump to you, Charles, really quick. What do you think about these inhibitor chips? Do you think they're a good plot device?
I've always thought they were kind of a lazy plot device. The first time we ever hear about Order 66 in any of the canon or lore is literally in Revenge of the Sith, where you have that iconic scene of the Emperor sending out the order and all of these Jedi dying, all these different alien battlegrounds all across the galaxy. And they don't explain that in the movie, why that happened or why the clones actually did that. And the common question, and I think it's even raised in this episode of the Bad Batch, is how could clones who have fought beside these Jedi for years, you know they've got brothers and sisters dying in the trenches, and the Jedi are leading them into battle, how can they just turn on them so easily like that? And I think there's a number of ways to explain it. The chips is a plausible way to explain it. It kind of makes sense that if you have an army of clones, you really only need to tailor the chip to one set of DNA. That way you can mass produce it with the clones. And the Bad Batch are just abnormal enough that it doesn't quite work. So, I mean, that's where it's plausible, but I've always thought it was kind of lazy.
So, just a follow up question to you, Charles. With Dave Filoni being what's considered by many the future of the Star Wars franchise and its writing, do you think it's time that he gives up these lazy writing tropes, or do you think it's okay to stick with these?
Um, so again, it's all really how you use it. You can always circle back and redefine some other details here, there, whatever, that either, I wouldn't say retcon, because it's not retconning. It's more clarifying. It's kind of what George Lucas did with midichlorians, right? The whole assumption was that this force is just some mystical power, but Lucas provided an explanation. So if you as a writer want to change the perception of something, you can go back and change it. The other way that might actually be a thing is Filoni is actually doing the multiverse concept thing, and we may have chips in one universe, no chips in another. Pick the Star Wars that you like.
Very interesting. Thank you. So let's get into the episode itself now that we've kind of beaten around the characters and all the rest of it. Um, the opening part right before Order 66. Zendrin, what was your impression of Depa Balaba and all the rest of the Jedi that they at least showed at this point? What were your impressions of the initial combat and episode?
The very opening, I touched on it briefly before, but the very introduction was amazing. That you get to see the scope of the battle, and seeing how the Jedi are much more tactitious and concerned about not only their lives but the lives of their troops, and that they're waiting for backup before they can do anything. Um, Obviously, retreat isn't an option because there's the loss of who knows how many, countless. Um, and yeah, just seeing how the Jedi interact with the clones and interact with the battlefield is very interesting to me.
Cool. So in the episode, we see one of the main characters, Rebels, whatever his name is, the Jedi apprentice, come back with leading the Bad Batch, and they change the entire tide of the battle. Do you think it's an expression of their training, or perhaps they're just being different, uh, Brad, that they were the only ones to try to outflank the enemy?
I think there is definitely the touch of the different thinking now. They are commandos, I believe, and clone commandos are very how should we say different in their tactics. They don't necessarily obey orders, but approach things from their own way. And I could see how they could turn the battle and move for that flank. but it depends on positioning of the other troops. How do I say? Because it's not necessarily easy to jump up into the forest when you've got, tanks or artillery firing down on you. You've got to stay dug in. If you get up, there's that chance that you get shot down. So them having that approach from the side was much more reasonable.
That makes sense. So my impression of the episode, at least the very beginning of it, was I would have shot Depa Balaba as well, just like any of the other clones did. Uh, just charging your troops time after time down a single road into enemy mortar fire seems to be a classic reason why the Jedi got fragged in the end. But let's jump on to another topic, unless anyone else has anything to say about it. But let's jump into Tarkin, our boy, the leader of the first Death Star. What were your impressions, mythos, of Tarkin in this episode?
Well, as far as Tarkin goes, the only real time I enjoyed him was in the original trilogy. I mean, that, going back over in the series and everything, it doesn't, how do I put it? It doesn't have that same feel about it. But like I said, with Omega, I'm going to see how his character develops in the show and see if it actually fits up with what we remember from the original trilogy.
Perfect. Now, Charles, what was your impression of Tarkin in this episode? Was he a well done character, or was he more of a sit back and evil bad guy that's kind of trope at this point?
I think they were very close to how the character was portrayed in the original trilogy. He's got this evil air about him, but he's quiet. He lets his power do the talking for him. And I've always been a fan of that kind of a villain, but I definitely think they're doing it right here. And it's great to see. I'm looking forward to seeing more of him in the series if that's going to happen.
Wonderful. Now, Mavinger, what are your thoughts on Tarkin in this episode?
So I've spoken before, not on this podcast. Obviously, it's the first episode, but I've spoken before in conversations with y'all about the Legends wipe, right? And I think that if there was ever a character who suffered the most from Legends wiping out their story, it was Tarkin. He had excellent characterization and an excellent he was just a very well done character, both in the movies and in most Legends content. Obviously, not all of it. The vast amount of Legends content that there is, it's not everything's gonna be a banger, right? And I think the reason he suffered so much is because he's always kind of struck me as just not quite. He feels more like the villains of old, where it's like, sit back and twiddle your fingers and go, yeah, this plan is going to destroy them for sure, kind of character now.
No. Now, is that all you have to say on Tarkin, or do you want to expand a little bit more?
Yeah, what we see of Tarkin, both in the Clone Wars and in this show, is basically any other admiral, right? Any other admiral or any other general, and they might elaborate on that if he's being built up to be the main villain of this series. Then we'll certainly see it elaborate on, and my feelings may change. But right now, it feels like he's got the job that like Admiral Trench in the Clone Wars, or whoever the prime minister was in Rebels, I can't even remember his name, got, where it was like, okay, we're told that this guy is incredibly competent and is a force to be reckoned with, but he's just going to get foiled every time we see him.
Yes. That would totally make sense. So I'm going to jump a little bit ahead. In this episode, we see the Bad Batch go off on a mission, find somebody special, a tie-in to one of the favorite movies of the franchise, or my favorite movies of the franchise, which is Rogue One. So we see them discover Saw Gerrera on Onderon. Uh, Brad, what are your thoughts on Saw Gerrera's portrayal in this episode?
It's nice to see him before he was so heavily radicalized in which one was it? Rogue One, where he's you can see that fight in his eyes, how badly he wants to stick it to the Empire, but at the same time he's more concerned about the people around him right now than he is about the rebellion and doing the damage. And it's nice to see that. It's nice to see how he was before that switch, if you will.
Now, Charles, what are your thoughts on their portrayal of Saw Gerrera?
Um, so I didn't actually like Saw Gerrera's portrayal in Rogue One, and it wasn't the fault of the character. It was really how they wrote him in the end. Basically, how he was giving up and
Just letting
chose
himself down.
to die there. Yeah, he just kind of let himself die, and it's kind of the antithesis of everything the character represents. So I really would like to see some reason for that, or even something that makes that better. Does that kind of make sense?
Totally, totally. Mythos, what was your impressions of Saw Gerrera and his little happy band of refugees? Do you happen to know, since you've watched the Clone Wars and Rebels, who those two children are?
Actually, no, I actually lost that reference there.
Okay, so there were two. There's two children that were hiding behind Saw Gerrera. They seemed to be important since the camera lingered on them several times. So I was just wondering if perhaps they were characters you'd saw in the future in Rebels. Uh, Sorry to put you on the spot like that.
Oh no, it's quite all right. I mean, if there is, it didn't in the rewatch that I've done. It didn't click in my head at the time. Um, I'm gonna have to look that up. But yeah, I mean, honestly, it's great to see Saw Gerrera in this portrayal because you get to see him before essentially the damage was done. Uh, like seeing Rogue One. Um, and then of course the interaction with the Bad Batch and how everything goes downhill from their meeting. Um, in all honesty, the scene was a great scene. I liked how I wouldn't say really used the the members around him, but how he portrayed himself to be what's the terminology I'm looking for? How he turned the the voice against the empire per se. Um, and the realization that Tarkin had sent them there to kill him and everything, and uh, there's not much really I could say on that part because I mean, like I said, it was a great scene. It was more nostalgia than anything. Um, but I am gonna look up the kids and see if there's anything to do with them. Because now that you mentioned it, I do remember seeing them pan on them quite a few times. I just thought it was more for flair and showing kids being scared
Could
and
totally be.
kind of pulling on the heartstrings, basically.
Okay. So Zendrin, uh, what do you think about Tarkin's motives here? Did he really want Saw Gerrera dead and his little band of rebels, or was it just purely a test for the Bad Batch to kill them?
I honestly think it was a mixture of the two. It's a really good chance to kill two birds with one stone. You put the test to Clone Force 99, and see if they can prove their mettle, if you will. And at the same time, you get to take out this potential threat to the Empire.
So a counter question to that would be, why would they only send the Bad Batch if there was a chance to fail?
I believe because in the worst case scenario, then at the end of the day, he gets what he wants, and how do we say, gets to phase out the clones and move for conscripted stormtroopers. Again, this is almost like it serves, no matter the outcome, it serves his purpose.
Oh, that would make sense. That would make sense. Now, Zach, what were your thoughts on the mission itself, the way it was conducted? Do you think um, landing 2 kilometers away from a rebel outpost with a very loud shuttle was a good idea?
So first, I'm going to go ahead and comment. I'm going to piggyback off of what Brad was saying, where I don't think that they were so much sent alone to disprove the clone's effectiveness, as much as he was trying to ascertain their loyalty. And if I were in Tarkin's position, and I had a group that I wasn't sure if they were loyal to me, I would send them off on their own as a loyalty test to see how they act, rather than send them with a bunch of loyalist troops. Because you'll get more, you'll get a lot closer to how they really feel and think.
Okay.
But back to your question about their actual strategy coming into the op. I think given that they thought they were fighting droids at the time, they weren't ever instructed that they were going to be dealing with people and people tactics. I'm sure that they figured 2 kilometers out with the shuttle is probably a safe distance to just book it, right? To hoof it. I think it would have been interesting to see how they approached the situation, knowing that they were going to fight people who use dynamic tactics, unlike the droids.
Now, Mythos, you've seen a lot of the Clone Wars. In the Clone Wars, are droids considered deaf, or do they have sound sensors at all?
Honestly, they appear to have sound sensors of some sort. I mean, uh, I wouldn't say that is very good sound sensors, but they appear to have some because in a few of the episodes, you notice them actually acknowledge, um, you know, people within reasonable
Okay,
distance
all right.
of them.
Now let's jump forward a little bit in the episode. So they come back after letting Saw Gerrera go, or also getting captured. They come back to Camino to rescue Amiga, uh, and they get captured yet again. Uh, Zendrin, what did you think of their escape plan?
It was smart, the way they used the fact that it wasn't necessarily a military facility to begin with, that they could use Wrecker's strength to their advantage and poke a hole in the wall. I think things lined up very well. I think they wrote that very well. Um, I think the guards should have caught on a little sooner, but again, got to have that grain of salt for the kids show, and you got to get that escape in. But overall, I think it was a good escape plan.
All right. And Charles, what were your thoughts on the escape and Nala Se helping them?
So I actually had some very specific thoughts on this kind of a trope that we're seeing more and more in the series. So Nala Se is kind of one of those throwaway tertiary characters where they might characterize her with a line or two or a reaction or two throughout the episode, but then in the end she is pretty much the linchpin for allowing them to get away. If she hadn't done what she had, they probably wouldn't have. um, so in the future, it's likely that she's probably going to get caught out. She's going to get found out. I mean, we've seen that sort of writing in Rise of Skywalker with the one informant. Later, they plop his head on the table. The Imperials got him. So we know that it's not impossible for that to happen to her. Um, and it seems, from a writing perspective, kind of like a very crappy thing to do to that kind of a character. Like why would she do that? There's no real good answer to that question. At least not that we're seeing, not that we see in the episode. However, um, I mean, the thing I really kind of hate about it is it's a missed opportunity to characterize the main characters even more. But we do see a little bit of that with the ending with Crosshair. Um, them being forced to leave him behind. Um, that is one of the main characters essentially making uh, a sacrifice unwillingly, but still. And you see a little bit of that characterization there, but it's very minimal. It's very minimal. I wish there were more impactful and meaningful things that happen to these kind of main characters. But it's a pilot. We've got more episodes to develop the characters throughout the main season. I mean, it wouldn't be much of a show if they did the whole story of the first episode. So I'm looking forward to seeing what Filoni's going to do with it.
Yeah, I agree. Now, Brad, Zendrin, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I just wanted to interject quickly. Charles mentioned earlier that the I can't remember her name, but whoever it was that halted the hangar doors, it seemed to
Say.
have no motive. Um,
All of a sudden,
I believe it's kind of it's not stated, and you kind of have to pick up on it like little bits here and there. But I believe her intent is to maintain the cloning facility personally, um, to make sure it continues running, and or to prove that Clone Force 99 is a very effective team, even if it's detrimental to the Empire.
Now, I got the impression that she was doing it to help her friend Omega. Uh, and I'll piggyback back off this, and we'll jump to you, Mythos. Do you think that this trope of characters doing something out of the blue to free or help uh, other characters, the main characters, do you think that this trope of Deus ex machina is a concerning development in Star Wars? I mean, it's been there pretty much since the beginning, but it seems to be, in my opinion, uh, growing more and more as we see more and more episodes. What is your opinion on the trope of Deus ex machina? And if you want, on Nala Se.
Talking to me, right?
Yes, Mythos.
Well, honestly, I mean, we have to remember this is a kids show. I mean, you're going to have a few tropes that just happen for happening's sake. I mean, it's just essentially what it is. I mean, and for some of the tropes, uh, usually later on it's revealed to have been for this reason or this reason, and that we've seen in a lot of shows, and it's got usually got an explanation behind the reasoning why. Um, so I've got a feeling that we're going to see that in a future episode.
Well, perfect. All right, everybody. So we're wrapping up here at this moment. What are your guys' final impressions on the episode? Did you like it, and do you look forward to the series, or are there things you would, say Dave Filoni's listening to this podcast, which he will never, but say he were, what would you like to tell him? Charles, you're up.
Um, Man, you kind of put me on the spot with this one. I guess the best thing, if Dave Filoni is listening in on this, is to lean into the multiverse thing. I think it's a great direction. Potentially, we saw it work very successfully with the MCU. Um, Disney already has a lot of experience doing stuff like that, again, because of the MCU. So I would like to see more information on World Between Worlds. I am kind of looking forward to this series, mostly because of the podcast, but also to see what Dave Filoni specifically does.
Perfect. And let's go jump to Mavinger. What were your final thoughts on the episode, and what would you tell Dave Filoni if he was listening?
So, final thoughts. I came into Bad Batch expecting a repeat of Rebels, which was a lot of hype because they're the same people that did the Clone Wars, and a lot of excitement, and then being utterly disappointed. I'm glad to say that I have actually enjoyed the first episode of Bad Batch a lot more than I thought I would. It is still a kid's show, but there were plenty of moments that got a genuine laugh out of me that were supposed to be funny. And most of my actual issues with the show, other than worried about how they're going to handle Omega and the chips itself, are nitpicks. Right, the armor thing, that's a nitpick. There was a moment Appa and I watched it together the first time around, and there was a moment in it where I paused it to nitpick, and I go, "This is an example of what I'm not going to do during the podcast, though."
You clarify for the podcast audience who Appa is.
Right, Zindran or Brad.
Perfect. Thank you. Continue. All right. Now to Zendrin. What are your final thoughts on and messages?
I think the setup is really good. Again, really big fan of the art style, and I really love the direction of the show. There are obviously the odd nitpick here and there, and again, they are honestly just nitpicks and small little things. Genuinely excited to see how things go, and moving forward, I really like it. I'd really like to see things lean in towards that almost that brutal realism, personally. But yeah, no, overall, just it's great so far, and I'm excited to see what's to come.
Perfect. And now wrapping up with you, Chad Mythos. What are your final thoughts?
Well, coming into watching this, like I said, I mean, I'm a fan of Rebels. I'm a fan of Clone Wars, especially the last couple seasons, because they expanded more out than they had been doing. Even though it got a little bit darker in that. But coming into this, I pretty much got what I expected. I mean, I knew that it was going to be good in my opinion. And of course, from the get go with the nostalgia from Rebels and finally setting that story up and everything, and with the unfortunate death of his master and everything, and then of course Order 66, how they reacted to it, um, which I think was phenomenal considering that the rest of the clones just followed orders. That I actually love that aspect in this. That they didn't just follow orders. Uh, and then of course, just the whole episode being extended to explain the introduction of the show and everything and what they're trying to portray instead of just cramming it into like a 30-minute episode. I mean, they did a fantastic job in this first episode.
Perfect. Thank you for your final thoughts. I'll give my own. Uh, really enjoyed the episode. I surprised myself by actually liking the series. Uh, I never liked Clone Wars. I despised Rebels, but for some reason, this one's got me hyped. Uh, other than my one last message to Dave Filoni is, if you're going to cast people to be voice actors, let's try not to get someone that sounds 30 to play a child. Uh, that's probably my only big nitpick. Is Omega is sounds like a probably an adult lady, and I don't know, it doesn't really work for me. Well, thank you everyone, and I really appreciate your time and joining us here on our discussion. If you have any other feedback, let us know. Thank you so much, everyone.